Well, welcome, divas and dudes, to Powerhouse Bakery. I'm so excited to get to have another week of challenge and chatting with you about the nutrition world. And you probably figured by now that there are so many interesting topics that we get to cover in these classes because truly nutrition science is constantly evolving. We're learning new information. We're really getting to better understand our interaction with foods, and it's truly a chemical soup out there. It's really chemistry of our physiology and then also chemistry of food. And we have recently gone through the biome, which I promised you was going to pop up throughout the future topics because so much of our physiology we're finding out has to do with our overall health, which means that every organ has an impact in our overall health. And we're finding that that gut biome is in fact one of those organs, even if we didn't really think of it as an organ, it really is. And so some of the newest information around our topic today, and that is non-nutritive sweeteners, is going to be looking at where these get digested. Because for a long time we thought that non-nutritives or diet sweeteners would just go right through our body. Really wouldn't matter because we knew they didn't give us calories, so that must mean that they're not bad for us. They're in fact going to help us. And so what I want to look at is, what was diet sweeteners trying to fix, and did it fix those situations or those conditions? So that should be always our decision process. When we're looking at food and science and the human body, we're trying to figure out efficacy and safety. So we're always trying to figure out efficacy and safety. Efficacy means, is it doing what we think it should do? And safety, is it safe for us? So of course we want the outcome to be better than not using it, right? Safety and efficacy. And then we also want to know, what's the cost? What's our risk factors of using a product that we think is going to help us be healthier? That's always what it boils down to, is something that we are learning and doing in the world of science really going to help us be healthier? So what conditions are sweet substitutes trying to fix? Anybody want to guess? Yep, obesity. So too many calories in leads to obesity. So if we cut out some of the calories by switching a regular soda for a diet soda, would that fix our problem? Any guesses? No, right? In fact, it's pretty clear when we look at very large epidemiological studies that when people use diet sweeteners, they do not lose weight. Now, the smoking gun will really be, when they use diet sweeteners, does it make it worse? So the jury's still out. But obesity was not fixed by diet sugars. So it's not better when we use diet sugars. They do not help. What about diabetes? Seems pretty obvious, right? A lot of endocrinologists, regular practitioners will say, okay, Mrs. Smith, you need to lose weight and you are pre-diabetic, so you need to cut out sugar. And the person says, I can't. I love sugary things. Don't tell me I can't eat something sweet. And he says, okay, eat diet sweetener. Use diet sugars when you are picking out snack foods and baking. And the person says, okay, so the diabetes type 1 or 2, does that help this condition by eating diet sugars? What do you think? Not much. Now, in the short term, if we were to measure somebody's blood sugar after they drank a regular soda and then check their blood sugar, and then they drank a diet soda and check their blood sugar, Well, we do see a cause and effect. So with type 1 diabetes, the person's body cannot make any insulin, right? So their pancreas is not functioning, which means that they really rely on medicines. Type 2 is a little more nebulous. We're not really sure exactly with type 2 what's caused the elevated blood sugar, but we know that they don't handle sugary foods well because their blood sugar goes up. So let's suffice to say that with all of diabetes, the problem is that blood sugar is too high. And if we tested that person that already has a sensitivity to having high sugars, if they drink a regular soda and we check their sugars, yes, the blood sugar would get high. If they drank a diet soda right away, that blood sugar would not be affected. So now we're thinking, okay, good, well then it must be good for diabetics. But what we have found though is over time, the diabetic does not have an improved overall blood sugar control. Why is that, right? So that's where, the scientists really scratch their head and think, well, how could that be? So we start looking a little deeper into the physiology. So that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. But let's keep going here. We know that other big lifestyle factors, we know cardiovascular disease is something that we know is a lifestyle disease. And in general, we know that if somebody has cardiovascular disease, that means that they probably have elevated blood pressure. They probably are overweight. They might have something with blood sugars going on, but for sure their heart is not healthy. Their arteries and their veins are not able to really transport the nutrients in an effective way, right? It's either that there's clogs in the arteries or their heart is somehow not strong enough to do the job. And so we know that if we fix the amounts of fats in their blood and the amounts of sugar in their blood, that kind of helps this person with cardiovascular disease. So it's a little less directly related to sugars, but we know that overall, if this person is eating a lot of sugars, so now let's look at a high sugar diet, we know that it gives you also high triglycerides. So this correlation is what affects cardiovascular disease, and of course the other ones too. But we know that if somebody drinks a lot of diet drinks, we don't automatically see an elevation in triglycerides. If somebody drinks a lot of Cokes or orange juice or apple juice, we do see a lot of triglycerides, which then makes it harder for the heart to do its job. So now we've seen obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease as really important disease states of our culture. We hoped that reducing calories and overall sugar might help, and there's a big question mark by it. Gosh, we're not sure if that's really helping. So let's look at a little more detail. Why is it not helping? So in general, when we are trying to understand where these sugars are going, and we've talked a little bit about the digestion process, right? And we know that regular sugar, as soon as we see it, our body gets ready for it. As soon as you see a cupcake, what happens? Our serotonin automatically goes up, or we start to salivate. And really what's happening below our chin, there's stuff happening also. Our pancreas is getting ready. The hormone ghrelin is super excited because there's stuff happening. And so we're so excited because a food is coming along and our body is preparing for it. So to me, that's pretty cool. So when we digest regular sugar, it goes into our mouth and it right away goes up to the brain. Central nervous system gets stimulated. And it says, all right, body, so exciting. Can't wait. We have some calories coming, calories on the way. And of course, when our body is planned for developing for energy and movement and the fight or flight and hunter and gathering, we need calories. So this feedback loop's really powerful. We need to have our body ready to go. So the central nervous system already gets alerted as soon as it hits the mouth that calories are coming into the gut. It goes even farther, and we start seeing in the lower intestine things happening in the biome. So this is kind of cool too, because now we've got the pancreas stimulated. We've got the small intestine getting ready to absorb. So all the bells and whistles are going on as soon as we see the food. So even the biome gets ready. Now, let's actually swallow the sugars. Now what's happening, it gets into our GI tract, and we really do get a reaction because now the blood sugar is going to go up. Goes up. And the insulin then is responding. So now the insulin gets turned on and insulin goes into the body. And that's a good thing. I don't want us to hear the word insulin and think that's a bad thing. Insulin is absolutely critical especially for getting protein into the muscle as well as energy into the muscle. And if we didn't have insulin come in board, what do you think would happen to the blood sugar? It would just keep going up and up. Insulin is what opens the doors and lets that blood sugar go into the active muscles, so the bicep and even the fat cells. So the insulin's super important for turning it on. So if we didn't have the insulin response, that would be a problem. But the pancreas is really important because it puts the insulin into the gut and it gets brought into the muscles. So it goes energy into the muscles. So all of this to say that there's this wonderful cascade of events that happens when we have sugar. And we could say sugar as in super healthy orange juice or a pear or a peach or honey or table sugar. I have one client, a younger guy, and his dad sent me this great little video on sugar is sugar, whether it comes from a Coke or oranges or orange juice. And this guy's point was, get rid of it all. It's all bad for you. It's all the same. And this young guy, he's 18, and his dad's very concerned about him and said, gosh, what do we do? Now he doesn't even want to eat fruit because he just watched this guy on YouTube, and the guy on YouTube said all sugar is exactly the same. Get rid of it all, period. What a rabbit hole that goes into, because we know, as well as you guys have been attending and listening to physiology, that sugar is part of our energy system. It's absolutely paramount. That's the way our bodies are made to use sugar. It comes in lots of different forms. Now, I know you would have a great response to him. You'd say, well, orange juice or a peach or some plums or even honey are going to bring with it something different than Coke. What would it be? Or table sugar. What would be the differences? Of course, vitamins, minerals. Well, the guy on the YouTube didn't even get it right. He's like, well, it probably has some fiber. He was talking about orange juice. I was like, oh my goodness. Leave it to doctors, I don't know. He might not have been a doctor, but his point was that, yeah, what? It has some fiber in it, but that's not anything to worry about. Just take all sugars out, period. And I tried to convince the dad and the son that sugars are not all the same, that there is some really important macro and micronutrients that come along with the sugar that is very important in our entire digestive process and energy to our muscles. We can't live without it. Now you're going to say, yeah, but what about the people that do really well on keto diet? Huh? They do just fine. And my answer would be yes, they can survive because our bodies are so good at figuring out how to survive with what we give it. So if we didn't have sugar, our bodies are going to use a byproduct of fat metabolism. And does anybody have a little extra fat hanging around? Okay, maybe a little, right? So our bodies can break down our fat stores, and instead of sugar, it's going to go right into here via our bloodstream. And it's going to go through the process and give us energy. It can do that. It doesn't love it, but it can do it. Okay? So my point about sugar is that it's part of our natural biorhythm. it has to go through the process of digestion and then triggering insulin to be absorbed. I'm sorry, insulin to be put into the system so that it can be absorbed, right? Now, let's look at what happens with a diet sweetener. So now we have, pick out one. What's a diet sweetener that you know of? Aspartame. Okay, so what color is that packet? Yeah? Let's call it the pink packet. So say we just went to the doctor and the doctor said, okay, Mrs. Smith, you are pre-diabetic and you need to lose weight. So I need you to take out all sugar, and anytime you're going to have something sweet, you have to use the pink packet. And so then in your mind, it's going to have a flurry of thoughts. It means, do I never eat fruit? Do I take out all whites, so all the white starchies? Or do I just start drinking Diet Coke, thinking that, well, I'm just going to use non-nutritive sweeteners and it's just going to make everything else okay? Meaning, okay, I'm not going to really change too much else. I'm just going to change my beverage, or maybe in my morning coffee, instead of having regular sugar, I'm going to have a pink packet. So when this goes into the mouth, we get a stimulus of sweetness. Okay? And it doesn't get salivary amylase. It just stimulates the taste buds to go up to the CNS, the central nervous system, to go, hey, guess what? We've got some good calories coming down. Get ready, because it's really good. In fact, the pink packet and most of the non-nutritive sweeteners are like 200 to 300 times sweeter than regular sugar. And you'll find in a moment that most of the sweeteners are a blend, because a lot of them with this amount of intensity are so sweet they actually flip and turn into bitter. And of course, some of them also don't do well with heat. So if you put it in your coffee, it doesn't work. So lots to go on that. But let's keep thinking about, we put a pink packet into our coffee. It goes to our mouth. The mouth determines that it's sweet, but we didn't get any salivary amylase. So it kind of changes what ghrelin and neuropeptide Y and glucagon and insulin get triggered to do. Those are all those hormones that help us go, okay, food coming down, get ready, and then pretty soon, okay, I'm satisfied, don't eat anymore because now I'm full. All those hormone receptors start getting a little confused, because once it hits the stomach and then goes to the small intestine, and right here the pancreas is ready, because it was told that something was sweet by the CNS, but it's like, wait a minute, I'm going to put some insulin in here, and it has nothing to work on. Now, some sweeteners don't have an insulin response. A lot of the non-nutritive sweeteners don't affect insulin. And so those that are in favor of using non-nutritives would say, hey, it doesn't affect insulin. Don't worry about it. It goes through your body and it goes unnoticed. All it does is help you to buy the foods, pay some money for some foods that are great snack foods that have now been living under the halo of healthy because they have a diet sweetener in them. Follow me? But others will say, you know, even if it doesn't affect our insulin levels, it still goes down a little farther and affects the biome. Because remember, we learned about how important what we eat helps to also nourish the biome, right? It's like, well, if we eat soluble fibers and we have healthy fats, all of those important foods go down and nourish the biome. It's kind of like you are what you eat, because this organ is expecting us to feed it well. If we give it a chemical, it's not happy with us. And so, has anybody had a bad reaction to a non-nutritive sweetener? Maybe one of the OSs, maybe had gas or bloating. Xylitol is commonly put in gum, and sometimes we get gas and bloating from gum, and you might think because you're swallowing air, but it more likely could be from the non-nutritive sweetener. So really what I want you to see is that even though they're super sweet and the mouth recognizes it, and it goes up to the brain and says, okay, brain, we got some good stuff coming. It may or may not affect the insulin levels, and we know it does not affect the blood sugar level, right? Because it's not really sugar, so no effect on blood sugar. So now from the small intestine, we don't get any energy to the muscles. Now, in our world where we have a plethora of food, we don't have to worry about making sure our muscles have enough energy because, we've got all this extra fat hanging around. Surely it'll find somewhere to fuel, right? We kind of think, yeah, it'll just burn off my extra, fat around my thighs. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I wish it did. But when we don't have any energy in the muscle, what it does is go back up to the CNS, central nervous system, and go, hello, I'm hungry. Because what it thought it was getting came up short. So the non-nutritive sweetener does not help our chemistry, our hormones that say, I'm satisfied, I don't need to eat anymore, I'm good. And we also didn't feed the biome. Do you remember what the biome gives us? How about some serotonin? When we feed our biome, we get, yay, everybody's happy, serotonin's ready to go, and we also have some other hormones like melatonin. We have the energy like the fight or flight, epinephrine, all those things that the serotonin, all the things that the biome makes that help our state of mind, help our energy levels, and helps our overall wellness. We miss out on all of that because the packet, whatever color it is, does not give us the energy that makes our brain say, I'm done, and it doesn't give our biome the nutrients it needs to make serotonin. Does that make you never want to eat a diet sweetener again? It does me. Now, on the flip side, the good news, I could even say, is, for a long time, we were thinking that diet sweeteners were even worse off. Maybe it doesn't give our muscles fuel. Maybe even worse, it causes cancer. Or maybe it even worse does other things to our body that isn't healthy for us. That's the jury is really still out. We're pretty darn sure, though, that at the doses that are realistic, so safe levels of intake, we cannot say that there's a high risk of cancer. So that's good news. And a lot of the advocates or proponents of using non-nutritive sweeteners say, you know what, guys, it's all about balance. It's all about making sure that you don't get too much, because we've learned from animal studies that you can do a little bit of anything and seem to do okay for most people. When we start looking at epidemiological studies and the double-blind crossover, and if you guys have listened to my talks about how we want to read research and kind of disseminate a good research versus a not so good, remember, it's one that has a large study group. The researcher and the researchees don't know what they're getting. It's all double-blind. Those are really good studies. And when we look at animal studies on safe intake, we learn some really interesting things. So, of course, the amount. So, amount ingested has a big role to play. And of course, humans are not mice. So the studies that I'm going to chat about, we're looking at mouse studies, and the proponents of using non-nutritive sweeteners will say you can't draw conclusions from mice. So even when we say against diet sweeteners, the amount ingested is really high in these mouse studies, humans are not going to eat that much. So let's suffice to say that safe intake is very important when we're looking at safety and efficacy. Okay, and I think that makes sense. But now the big question will be, what is a safe amount, and how do we make sure that we stay within it? So a couple of studies looked at frequency of use. And so say we had two Diet Cokes a day. And we compared Diet Cokes to the regular Cokes. And we looked at these epidemiological studies versus two regular Cokes. What kind of outcomes did we have when we looked at epidemiological? And then I'll go to the mouse studies in a second. So what outcomes did we learn? Overall, when we compared this, we had only a 0.8 pound decrease by doing that trade out. So, golly, not very much help if we're trying to use it for weight loss. Kind of disappointing. We also did not see any increase in cancer. We didn't see any increase in tumor growth. But we did see, in some people, we had significant weight up and significant weight down. So there was a wide range of variability when we looked at a study that tried to be, comparing apples to apples. And I thought that was really interesting because people are so individual. Some of the studies tried to weed out some of the other factors. So for example, if somebody was a diabetic and they chose diet sodas more often, would that skew the data? Because they were already diabetic. Or if somebody knew they were pre-diabetic, they might choose a diet soda more often. So how would that skew the data? Really good questions. So ultimately, we're not sure. But let's now look at some of the animal studies, because I think these are so interesting too. When we look at behavior, so we looked at, just a moment ago, we looked at the disease states. Now let's look a little bit at the food searching or the behavior of it all. Behavior changes. I talked a little bit about how the cells don't get energy, right, if you're using a non-nutritive sweetener. It doesn't seem to make us feel full. But some mouse studies I thought were so interesting. A mouse study that looked at when a mouse was fed a diet sugar beverage and then another mouse was fed regular beverage. The one that had the diet sugar was a lot hungrier later in the day. And so again, that kind of makes sense when we looked at that idea of the central nervous system not being satiated. So that mouse would tend to overeat all day long when they are given the non-nutritive sweetener. We've seen that also in humans. We've seen people tend to overeat. Way back in my schooling at Emory University in Georgia, I was part of a study that looked just at that. So this is not new information. So I think that behavior changes are something that we're going to really need to look at more. And it's very hard to study humans, and that's why we end up looking at mice. But we are pretty sure that appetite is stimulated by the low sugar beverages. Okay? But the question is, how much is a safe amount? So let's flip this around and look at some of the differences. And that way it'll kind of help us understand how much and how often do we actually want to use some of these products. Probably the latest and greatest right now is stevia. People will often say, well, that one's healthy, it's natural. Can you think of anything that's natural that is deadly? Plenty. How about the botulinum bacteria? That'll kill you, and that's very natural. Cyanide, that's very natural. So I don't want anybody to think that natural equals safe and good. That's a really dangerous thought process. So stevia is from a plant, and we kind of call it Reb A because it's really a small ingredient in the whole sweetener. And that surprised me. It's 200 times sweeter than regular sugar, but when you see a sweetener that has stevia in it, it's a highly processed version of this little plant. Does anybody grow stevia in their garden? I think Elaine did, and I have some. And I'm sad that the hot sun killed it, but I'd love to grow it. Um, and it's very lightly sweet when you chew on it, but let's agree that it doesn't look anything like the white powder or the clear liquid that you squeeze into your drinks. Very different critter. And that's because this Rebe is a highly processed version of it. And so now let's go to the sugar alcohols. This is where I told you that the blood sugar and the insulin levels are really not affected like we would expect, but the alcohols do allow it to go up just a little bit. Xylitol, erythritol, sorbitol. So remember, when you're looking at labels, anytime it ends in an OL is a sugar alcohol. These are actually created by fermenting cornstarch. So a version of cornstarch that is processed to give us something that tastes sweet, so around 70% of the sweetness, and a little bit of calories, 5% of sugar calories, which I thought was interesting. Then we have aspartame. Aspartame is actually 2 amino acids. Who would have thought? So here we've got 2 amino acids that aren't meant to go together, that in a lab, so yes, it's not natural, in a lab they are able to put together 2 amino acids, and it turns out to be sweet in your palate. So when this one was first designed, we thought, oh great, that's healthy. It's just 2 amino acids. How can that be bad? Saccharin. What do we think about saccharin? It's become a little less popular, right? It tends to be bitter. It tends to be more difficult to use because of its difficulty in baking. Stevia, we mentioned up here. And then we've got a sulfame K, which is the sucralose and the Splenda. So up here, you can see similarities. Sugar alcohols are added in to this sulfame K. So what I want you to take away from this list is we've got lots of different chemistries going on. Some are a little bit closer to a sugar molecule, like the sugar alcohols. So it's been processed from a grain like cornstarch. They have some calories in them, though not much. The ones that have a little bit of calories in them do in fact cause the blood sugar to go up just a little bit. They're much sweeter. So all of these are like thousands of times sweeter than sugar. And so how the chemistry works on that is they mix it with other things in order to really work with that intense sweetness. Anybody know somebody that uses 1 packet of pink sugar or 1 packet of yellow? Yeah? Okay, good. And then you start doing 2. And then you start doing 3. It's fascinating. Now that I've said that, watch your friends, or maybe it's you too, that it's so addictive. You use a little bit, and then you need a little bit more next month, and then next year a little bit more. Highly addictive. Why is that? One thought is that our palate becomes acclimated to it. So here is this chemistry of different types that our body starts to kind of ignore. So you need more. You guys know I teasingly call sugar food cocaine, right? And that's because it has high crunch, high fat, high salt, high sweet. So food chemistry is trying to find that sweet so that we don't have all the negative side effects of food cocaine. And wouldn't you know, these chemicals are starting to be just like that. You always need more and more and more. So that's kind of scary to me too, that our bodies still ask for more. And ultimately, it's the question of where are these chemicals digested? So we know that some of them are digested in the kidney, meaning it never even makes it to the biome. It never even gets to the large intestine. And so then there was a fear, is there kidney cancer? Is there problems with the upper GI tract because of these chemicals? And so the good news is we're thinking that probably there isn't a high risk, and we can probably say that in a small amount you won't have the high cancer risk, so we love that. But we still don't know how much is safe. That generally recognized as safe, remember we learned about that, GRAS, didn't really give us an amount. And really most of the data on the safe intake, SI, is very hard to figure out. And so that's where I want us to be able to really understand where to go from here. Because whether or not it's digested in the kidney or it's taken all the way down to the biome and is kind of inert, meaning that, okay, we didn't get serotonin this day, but maybe our body's going to acclimate and maybe our body's going to burn ketones instead. What's the overall outcome? So let's look at this. One more little section to think about. If we go to our best foods list and we start putting our foods in here, where do diet sweeteners even show up? In snack foods, right? So many times people tell me, what are good snacks? And I become very unpopular because I go, there aren't any. Instead, how about just eat some of your lunch for a snack? Now, granted, Powerhouse Bakery, I sell oodles of snacks, right? So I'm trying to meet you where you are and have a snack that is still going to be nutrient rich. So if we go back to our best foods list, because I really want you to be able to walk away from our meeting and go, okay, where do I use non-nutritive sweeteners? Am I using as little as I can? Am I going to promise myself that 1 packet or 2 is all I do? Because we're going to have to develop our own safe and adequate intake, because it's very hard to really understand what the smart people from the NIH are telling us how much to eat. So if we go to our best foods list and we think of protein foods and carbohydrate foods and fats, where do those non-nutritives want to show up? So if we weren't reading labels really well, we might inadvertently find diet sweeteners or even sugar in things like condiments, right? We talked a little bit about that. In fact, I have some of my my chow chow I promised you from last week that I want you to get to try. So they end up going in as an add-in or a way to season foods, right? And so if we have veggies and we have complex carbs like grains, and we have bread, is there a lot of sugar in bread? No. If we pick a bread, are we worried that it's going to be too many carbs and cause us to get fat? Yes? No? I hope you'll say it depends on what kind of bread and it depends on what? Portion. Always comes down to this. Portion matters. So I had a lady that I met with last week and she said, oh, I use the low-cal bread because I'm diabetic. And what do you think tripped off in my mind? It's like, oh, rats. There's no need to pick a diabetic bread or a low-calorie bread because you're diabetic. What I'd rather you do is pick one that has plenty of complex carbs. We know what's in complex carbs: protein, micronutrients, naturally occurring fiber. What about a bran muffin? Is that going to be complex carb? It depends. If we made a bran muffin with a little Jiffy box mix, is that a good choice? No, because you look at that mix and go, holy moly, all this stuff in here, hydrogenated oils, high fructose corn syrup, blah, 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 blah. Bran is really the part that we should normally get from a whole grain. And like Raisin Bran, what do? They shredded all the bran off of the wheat and they dumped it into the cereal. It's like, oh, crumb. What about all the rest of the stuff that's good? Right? They left that out. The bran is got no nutrients in it per se. So when we start thinking about carbs, there's really no spot where we need to have a non-nutritive sweetener. Yeah, and then you say, yeah, but Suzanne, I cannot drink my tea unsweet, right? And so my response would be, try doing another flavor. So when our kids are growing up, their first palate preference is sweet, right? And as we get a little older, We start appreciating a little sour, a little bitter. And so we need to go back to that taste bud range. If we're not careful, the food cocaine means that we get so addicted to sweet that we don't appreciate sour or bitter or just fresh, right? I listened to a great YouTuber last night about how we're raising our kids. And, there's this thing where, kids don't drink water because it tastes nasty. I don't know if you've been around a little kid that says that, because their taste buds have been so acclimated to intense flavors brought on by either diet sweeteners or refined white sugar. So either way, portion is still a bad thing because we've let those kids get so much intense flavors that food cocaine has now kind of messed their taste buds up. So thinking about enjoying a cup of tea or a cup of coffee with some very soft flavors, either plain or herbs or lemon, now your taste buds start acclimating and you edge off the food cocaine conundrum, which means more, give me more. That darn wind out there. Sorry. Protein, same thing. If we have fish and we have chicken, beef, and if you guys saw me on SA Live yesterday, the happy world of lentils, where does non-nutritive sweeteners come in? Nowhere, right? Now, you might say, yeah, but Suzanne, what about when I want to flavor these things? Well, if we are careful and we look at our spice blends and our maybe our barbecue sauce and Worcestershire, sometimes those will have added sugar. Somebody asked not yesterday, but last week about the mayonnaise. What's the mayonnaise that has lots of sugar added? Anybody remember? Miracle Whip. Yes, thank you, Mary Louise. And so, yeah, I mean, if you were picking mayonnaise and you said this one or this one, that one has a whole bunch of sugar added. Why do I need sugar in my mayonnaise? Oh, it's a cheap filler? Grab this one. And then you think, oh, this one costs so much more. Really? Is it going to cost an extra $1? That's okay. I would want you to spend the extra $1 because you're not going to use that much. It's a concept where we feel like we're spending so much when it's just $1. Lentils are a great example. At my show yesterday on SA Live, I was talking about a very inexpensive way to do meal prep for the week. And you can use organic lentils that cost $2.37. Or you can buy the regular lentils for 99 cents. And people think, holy cow, I'm not going to buy that organic one. That's so expensive. And then I put it in perspective. It's not really that much difference. Yes, if you said it's, 3 times as much. Or you can say it's still only $2.37. And you get all these things out of it. So when you're picking condiments, that's where you might find some non-nutritives. And with fats, you don't see a lot of non-nutritives unless it's things like, well, I want to pick a healthy ice cream, or I want to pick a healthy yogurt. Of course, it's the high-fat one, and it's now trying to tout that it's low in sugar, so it's used with a non-nutritive sweetener to try to give you the idea that it has more value. And what I would say is still get whatever yogurt you want, whether it's high-fat or not, and still make sure that it's regular sugar. Now, of course, you could get plain and add in your honey. And I know it doesn't mix very well, but if you give it a good stir and then you get a little extra honey at the bottom or off your spoon, that's just a bonus, right? I went to Starbucks the other day and I ordered one of the new drinks, and it had vanilla syrup in it. And I didn't know that, and I drank it and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so sweet. And then it dawned on me, so at Starbucks they have all those flavors. Those are just high fructose corn syrup with some flavor added, and you just pour those into your drink, and so it's like a direct line into your bloodstream of sugar. Or you could pick the diet one, and what are you getting? A direct line of non-nutritive sweeteners into your body. Versus the very unpopular, the simple, unadulterated black coffee. Yeah, I know. And so we are really at the mercy of the nutrition and food world if we're not careful. There's a big discussion around non-nutritives being good for you, bad for you, in the middle, don't really bother you. And so you'll need to decide where you fit on that spectrum. No matter what, keep it to a small amount. And keep your total sugar intake to a small amount, because ultimately we want to get all of our calories here. And what's really cool is I went to school at UC Davis, so University of California at Davis, and they're doing a ton of research on the human behavior around sweet. And even back when I went to college, which was a while ago, I was involved in research studies on testing mice. So I promise you, we're going to still test mice. They are a little version of a mammal. So granted, we're not mice, but we can learn a lot from this animal model. And we are learning that even if you fed a mouse a lot of diet sweeteners and you followed his biome evolution and he became a pre-diabetic mouse, and then you did a fecal transplant into a mouse that had no biome at all. He's been grown in a very sterile environment, so no bacteria. Guess what happened to that mouse that got the fecal transplant of the pre-diabetic? He became pre-diabetic. And I was involved in that study at UC Davis. So it's like, wow, there's some facts that we really want to learn about. And that is how our biome interacts with what we eat. Choosing whole foods as much as we can gives us the safest bet. Avoiding chemicals is a really safe bet, because we're just not sure whether it gets digested in the kidneys or it gets digested somewhere else. We're pretty sure we can't directly correlate diet sweeteners with cancer. Yay. But we're just not sure what else is happening to that chemical when it's in our body. So I hope that helps. I hope that you'll continue to build your best foods list and find ways to cut out snack foods and kind of junk foods that you're going to find these in. On SA Live yesterday, I was with another gal that was showing healthy breakfast for her kids. And boy, did I have to zip my lip. Because it was everything boxed. It was pancake mixes. And it was, the keto and the paleo, all the marketing stuff out there, to throw to your kids. And then when you think about it, what's more important than taking care of your kids? Making sure you feed them well. And I know that every mom that was watching that and followed those recommendations wanted to take good care of their kids, but they're being fed misinformation that quick and handy in a box is much better than quick and handy in a bowl. Okay? So I hope this helps, and I'd love to take some of your questions, but keep working on your best foods list and see what you can do with wholesome, minimally sweet goodies. See you next time.